fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
The chill hit me the moment I crossed the threshold of the Command Conclave, a biting cold that sliced through the thin weave of my desert silks. Gooseflesh bloomed across my arms, a stark contrast to the simmering heat of the Xylos desert I'd left behind. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the weight of expectation, the palpable scrutiny of the 4 commanders seated around the obsidian table. 3 of them barely acknowledged my presence, their faces polished masks of indifference, radiating a disdain that felt almost bored. They saw me as a necessary inconvenience, a petitioner from a backwater system. But it was Vol'Sereth who commanded my attention, stole the air from my lungs. Eyes, they weren't merely dark, they were smoldering coals flecked with gold, and they seemed to burn with an inner fire, a restless energy that mirrored the pulsing void spiral etched into his throat, a mark of his lineage, his power. The spiral throbbed with a faint violet light, casting dancing shadows on his sculpted features. My gloved fingers, usually steady, trembled as I reached for the small jade box on the table, a gesture meant to appear casual, even clumsy, accidentally knocking it over. The lumina dust within exploded in a glittering cloud, a miniature galaxy swirling between us. It wasn't planned, not exactly. A deliberate distraction, perhaps, a test. The sound, a delicate chime as the jade shattered, drew the attention of the other commanders, their expressions shifting from boredom to annoyance. But Vol'Sereth's gaze didn't flicker. It remained locked on mine, an unnerving intensity that felt like a physical touch. A shiver traced its way down my spine, raising the hairs on the back of my neck, and then a brush. His boot, clad in polished black durasteel, grazed mine under the heavy table. A fleeting contact, barely perceptible, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through my body, a shockwave that resonated deep within my core. The guards flanking the table didn't seem to notice, their faces impassive, trained to observe everything and see nothing. But I felt it, a lightning strike. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The chi, the bio-monitoring implant woven into my nervous system, flashed a warning. Vol'Sereth, elevated physiological state, increased heart rate, pupil dilation. I didn't need the alert, my body already knew. Every cell was humming, vibrating with a dangerous, unfamiliar attraction. It was illogical. He was a commander, a warrior, a man steeped in power and responsibility. I was a negotiator, a representative of a small, insignificant system. A sand viper, as Commander Thuron had so eloquently put it. "State your business, sand viper," Thuron's voice cracked like a whip, the sound making me jump despite myself. He was the eldest, the most conservative, and the most openly hostile. I forced myself to meet his gaze, to project an air of confidence I didn't feel. But before I could speak, Vol'Sereth's voice cut through the tension, a velvet growl that stroked places no man had ever touched. "I'll hear her privately." His gaze dropped to my mouth, lingering there, a silent promise of both reward and retribution. The implications of his words slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. A flush rose to my cheeks, betraying my composure. I met his gaze, trying to decipher the emotions swirling within those dark eyes. What did he want? What game was he playing? And why did I feel like I was walking into a meticulously crafted trap, one that would irrevocably alter the course of my life? Thuron's face turned a mottled red, his eyes bulging with indignation. "You can't just demand to see her alone, Vol'Sereth," he spluttered. "This is a matter of state security. She represents the Kythan Collective, a system on the verge of collapse. We need to assess their vulnerabilities, not indulge your whims." Vol'Sereth's gaze never left mine, his eyes burning with an intensity that bordered on possessive. "I'm afraid this is a matter of personal security, Commander," he said, his voice low and even laced with a subtle threat. "And I will not be swayed." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "The Kythan Collective's stability, or lack thereof, is of little consequence if we cannot ascertain the true nature of their representative." The other commanders exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a picture of discomfort. It was clear that Vol'Sereth was a man who got what he wanted, regardless of the cost. A man who operated by his own rules, and I was about to discover just how high that cost would be. "Very well," Thuron said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "But be warned, Vol'Sereth, if you're playing some kind of game, you'll regret it." Vol'Sereth's smile was a thin, cruel line, devoid of warmth. "I'm not playing games, Commander," he said. "I'm just getting started." The guards flanking the table moved with practiced efficiency, their faces expressionless. "Please follow us," one of them said, his voice firm but polite. I nodded, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Anticipation warred with dread. What lay ahead I had no idea, but I was about to find out. As I followed the guards out of the conclave, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a nightmare, a descent into darkness from which I might never awaken. The corridors were long and narrow, carved from the living rock of the planet's core. The air was thick with the scent of old stone, dust, and something else, something metallic and faintly floral, a scent I instinctively associated with Vol'Sereth. I could feel the weight of the conclave's history pressing down on me, the echoes of countless decisions, the whispers of forgotten secrets and carefully constructed lies. Then we stopped before a heavy, reinforced door, its surface etched with ancient runes. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades, perhaps centuries. The guard pushed it open with a groan, revealing a room that was surprisingly small and intimate. The walls were lined with bookshelves, overflowing with ancient tomes and strange artifacts, crystalline skulls, intricately carved boxes, and weapons that hummed with latent energy. Vol'Sereth was already there, his back to me, his gaze fixed on the cityscape sprawling outside the panoramic window. The lights of the capital glittered below, a deceptive illusion of peace and order. "Come in," he said, his voice low and even devoid of emotion. "Let's talk." I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click, the sound echoing through the room like a death knell. I was alone with Vol'Sereth, a man who seemed to be hiding a universe of secrets behind his eyes, and I was about to unravel them whether I wanted to or not. The air crackled with unspoken tension, with a dangerous energy that promised both pleasure and pain. I braced myself. This was no longer about the Kythan Collective. This was about survival.